Sure. Welcome back, everyone. I am Professor Peter Noonan, and I've been leading this thesis cohort along with Professor Brittany Williams, and we're going to round out the third day of a full half week of thesis presentations. This morning, our panel is everyone. I am Professor Peter Noonan, and I've been leading this thesis cohort along with Professor Brittany Williams, and we're going to round out the third day of a full half week of thesis presentations. This morning, our panel is everyone. I am Professor Peter Noonan, and I've been leading this thesis cohort along with Professor Brittany Williams, and we're going to round out the third day of a full half week of thesis presentations. This morning, our panel is everyone.
It's the Peter Noonan parallel.
It's like being John Malkovich. Thank you, Fabian. So we are joined by Ashraf Salama. He's a professor of architecture and urbanism and the head of the Department of Architecture and the Built Environment at the University of Northumbria. Professor Salama has been with us for the full ride, all 3 days. So we appreciate all that you've brought to the conversations. Amy Upton is here. She's a principal and director of environmental design at Grimm & Parker and elevated to fellowship in the AIA this year. Congratulations, Amy. And Rob Goodall, architect and urban designer who's practiced with Torti Gallis and SK&I and has taught at Syracuse University, is also joining us this morning. The first presentation is Tai-J English, and her committee was made up of Chair TJ Kim, Brett Williams, and Madeline Simon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tai-J English, and I will now be presenting the pathway to revitalization. So on the agenda today, we'll be starting with some background context, then going over the abstract and research. Then I'll go over some precedents, site analysis, the program and the proposed master plan, and finishing off with the building design. So the government created this book in 1955 that they nicknamed the Yellow Book, which is essentially a blueprint showing where all their major interstate highways may go across major cities. Although it mapped out the affected neighborhoods, it deliberately avoided showing exact street paths. And as a result, it allowed the government to easily push highways through low-income neighborhoods. The Yellow Book also allowed the passage of the Federal Highway Act of 1956, which provided the financial foundation for the entire interstate system. Following this, over 1 million people were displaced, with roughly 55% of them being from African American communities. Which brings us to my thesis question. How can architecture and urban design repair neighborhoods fractured by urban renewal while simultaneously empowering communities to reclaim displaced spaces, revive cultural identity, and cultivate collective memory and belonging? My thesis is focused on the displacement of minority communities due to mid-20th century urban renewal. It specifically looks at the highway to nowhere in Baltimore City, where they began construction on Route 40, but it was left incomplete after intense community opposition. This highway displaced over 1,000 residents and still remains as an urban scar dividing the city today. The overall topic of my research is about reparative architecture and urban design in post-urban renewal cities. An important concept that I learned about in my research is this concept of root shock. This is the traumatic stress response to losing all or part of one's emotional ecosystem. This stress response is a direct consequence of displacement. After my research, I studied three main precedents, which include Clyde Warren Park, the Nemo Science Museum, and the Manil Collection. My big takeaway that I gathered from each of these precedents was about integrating different building types into varying contexts, urban repair and reconnection, human-centered design, and social connectivity. Next, I will be going into the site analysis, which is a big driver for a lot of my design decisions. First, I think it's important to zoom out and look at Baltimore City as a whole. In almost all parts of the city, you have these prominent neighborhoods feeding the economy. For example, in South Baltimore, you have the Peninsula and Fed Hill. In Southeast, you have Canton. In East Baltimore, you have Fells Point. In North Baltimore, you have Hamden and the whole Johns Hopkins campus. In downtown, of course, you have the business district. But in West Baltimore, there are no prominent neighborhoods feeding the economy in this way. So this means it's important to create a walkable, livable area that matches the qualities of the other parts of Baltimore. This disconnect in West Baltimore is likely due to decades of systemic disinvestment in the community and not replacing the homes and businesses that were destroyed due to the construction of the highway to nowhere. Although it is called the highway to nowhere, it actually does lead to somewhere. This road leads to Catonsville and ties back into I-70 West, so it is important to keep the highway functioning as is. This is an aerial view of the site looking towards downtown, and as you can see, there's a gradual growth in scale as you head towards downtown in the back there. And this is an aerial view of the site looking back towards the county, so in the opposite direction, and you can see a gradual decrease in the scale as you head back towards Catonsville. This change in scale in both directions is important and will inform future later design decisions. Looking at the programmatic elements surrounding the site, it is predominantly row homes with a decent number of churches along the highway corridor itself. Additionally, there are a few schools in varying conditions and corner stores that are mostly abandoned. In the area, you can also see a few apartment buildings with more upcoming and future developments. This is a collage of some of the row homes along West Franklin Street, which is the northern street. Many of them are in a state of decay, with very few of these homes in an occupiable condition. On the other side of the highway is West Mulberry Street. So these are the homes along West Mulberry Street. The homes on this street still have quite a bit of vacancies, but they are structurally in a lot better condition. As far as the circulation goes, it is predominantly vehicular traffic, with Franklin Street and Mulberry Street being one-way traffic. Franklin Street runs in the west direction and Mulberry Street runs in the east direction. Many of the north and south streets along the site are two-way traffic streets, minus the two streets you can see here in blue in the diagram. And interestingly, there are also two pedestrian bridges, which are shown in the dashes, that run across the highway. But when I was on site, I didn't really see anybody utilizing these bridges. There are very few green spaces in the surrounding community, predominantly in Harlem Park, which is characterized by these inner block parks embedded behind the row homes. And along the highway also contains some open green space, which you can see in the darker green color in this diagram. And these are images of the space on the sides of the highway. But as you can see, there's a lot of trash and graffiti everywhere. So it kind of leaves this really bleak and gloomy landscape. And there were no people like really occupying the site. And this is what the view looks like driving under the underpass. So as you can see, it's not like the best condition or experience. The community surrounding the site is predominantly made up of 3 neighborhoods, all with deep historical ties. The first one is Harlem Park, which is what the highway is officially part of. The second is Franklin Square, and the last neighborhood is Poppleton, which is also currently being developed. But the common thing about these neighborhoods is that they are all in a state of urban distress. Through my deep dive into the history of all 3 neighborhoods, I realized that they are all very similar. They are all predominantly Black communities, all low-income communities with low home ownership rates and a low percentage of students getting a higher education. So out of this research, I think it's important to first address the basic needs of the community through the program. From that, I gathered 3 building types that I believe will be important for this neighborhood. The first building is a youth education center. This is important because the demographics of the community show that there are structural barriers limiting access to opportunity and creative career development. The history of disinvestment left few stable youth programs in the community, so this will give young people a safe space to strengthen confidence and creativity. The second building type is a neighborhood library. Given the education levels of the community, a local library can reduce the need for students to travel for study space, internet, and books. The last building type is a community museum. These communities all have deep African American heritage that is tied to Black working class history and a history of displacement from urban renewal. This history has not been preserved in any museums or archives, so a local museum can validate the stories of those who were erased, create pride within West Baltimore, and intergenerational storytelling. It can also be a reminder of this scar that was left on the city so that the past is not repeated. These buildings can work together to become a new civic anchor within the neighborhood, replacing those that were erased. Through my thinking and planning, I developed 5 program zones with 4 of these zones overlapping in order to create West Baltimore Heritage. West Baltimore Heritage celebrates the cultural identity and lived history of West Baltimore through exhibiting its history. The next zone is Neighborhood Visioning and Innovation, which supports collective empowerment, planning, and resource access across the community. The Community Cohesion Zone is about rebuilding the neighborhood to neighborhood social bonds that were severed by the construction of the highway to nowhere. The Community Learning and Skill Building Zone fosters education, creative development, and skill building by cultivating creative literacy, expression, career confidence, and personal growth. The last zone is Public Life and Promenade. This zone is all about activating public life through a shared outdoor experience, allowing people from the surrounding communities to see one another and rebuild a sense of collective belonging in the heart of West Baltimore. Next, I will be going over the proposed master plan. So from those program zones, I was able to use them and develop an overall master plan. The idea behind this master plan is that it will be built over top of the highway so that the highway can still remain underground because as mentioned before, it does function and actually lead to somewhere. The big idea behind this master plan is really about stitching back together the community in order to repair and heal the scar that was left in the city. It is also about creating a strong civic anchor that connects the schools in the north and south direction, while also tying the proposed plan together in the east and west direction. When aligning the master plan with the section, you can see the drastic change in topography on this site running west to east. But you can also see the way in which the proposed plan reacts to the gradual change in scale as you head towards downtown Baltimore. The proposed program of the master plan is pretty straightforward, consisting of a new development of row homes, an apartment, and some mixed-use buildings. In the center of this plan is the library, museum, and youth center. Ultimately, this development would be done in phases so that this part of the city does not end up back in a state of decay. The first phase being primarily the civic anchor with a few housing options so that people don't immediately flood the area. This also provides an opportunity for the north and south to catch up with development. The second phase would be more row homes, which brings back something familiar as part of that stitching together of the urban fabric. which still allows the surrounding communities to catch up with development. And the third and last phase would be something new as far as the mixed-use building typology in this area. And that would likely be the area that most people will want to move to and would drive the economy. Now on to the building program. I took the same program zones and the spaces thought of along with these zones and tie them back into a building and site design that can empower the community, reclaim space, revive cultural identity, and create a sense of belonging. The primary building I decided to focus on for this thesis is the youth center because I believe change starts with the youth. So if we want to see greater change in the future, we have to provide the youth with opportunities and access to make those changes. So all of the separate programs you see on the left here in this chart fall under the different program zones as discussed before. But again, they all come together to create West Baltimore heritage. So from this point on, I will be focusing on the design of the Be More Youth Center. The site and building party is about creating this park that directly aligns on access with all of the central and emphasized points of the program of the building. So it's this conversation between the building and the landscape. In this site plan, I developed a conceptual layout for the library to the south and the museum to the north of the site. The layouts of these buildings were inspired by the sort of push and pull nature of the backside of row homes in Baltimore. I developed this conceptual layout to be sure that these building footprints and masses can function properly as a building, but again, I did decide to focus on the youth center design. Additionally, here you can also see across these two blocks, there is a clear diagram of this park that is open to the public and this internal courtyard that is more secure for children. So beginning with this perspective, when you first approach the site, from either the north or south, you're greeted with this pedestrian path. And as you're coming from school and you enter this path, you are greeted by this large transparent volume that is a gym that draws you into the building. The layout of the building is also pretty straightforward with two lobby/welcoming spaces. One of them to the north being the main entrance that aligns with the classrooms for the children, and the other to the south acting as a foyer for the theater. The gym anchors the front of the building, and that is also aligned with the courtyard and the lounge space. The lounge space also leads out to a back deck that allows you to look back out onto the city, but also increases the connectivity between the east and west of the site. The layout of the youth center is also inspired by the push and pull nature that you can see when looking at the backside of row homes in Baltimore. This next perspective is in the courtyard. The courtyard is surrounded by glass, which gives it this transparent and open feeling so that you can see through the building. This is also the secure space for young children to be able to play freely. Additionally, this space allows you to access the roofscape. The roof of this building is activated via green spaces, gathering spaces, a track, as well as a mezzanine to allow visitors to view the gym from a different angle. The roof also contains the mechanical systems for the building that are covered by screens with greenery. This is a view from the roof on one of the green gathering spaces that allows you to look back out onto the park. This park is a space that people from the surrounding communities can come and gather freely with friends and family. Given the drastic change in topography of the site, a basement level was required in order to obtain loading. Not only did this allow loading, but it also captures the north and south directions along Calhoun Street. In the cross section, you can see the building is being cut through the classrooms, the courtyard, and the theater. But also you can see the street section that has developed as part of this thesis design, where the building does not run immediately into the sidewalks like the typical condition you see in West Baltimore. I left some greenery space to allow trees and like occupiable space on the sides of the building. Additionally, in this site section, it is cutting through all the major public spaces of the site and the building. So it's cutting through the park, the gym, the courtyard, and the lounge space in the back. In the elevations, you can see that the west elevation facing the plaza is of a different characteristic than the other elevations. The north, east, and south facades are all responding to the surrounding context of Baltimore, as they are made up of brick and punched out windows. The gym volume is made up of standard transparent glass, but also channel glass that really emphasizes this volume as the main anchor of the building. Another result of the topography change leaves a decent amount of blank wall on the north, east, and south facades. But something Baltimore is known for is pretty much murals all over the city. So, as you can see on the elevations along the streets, the idea here is to have these murals to bring back a sense of cultural identity to this site. This final perspective is a view looking out from the public park back to the building. Baltimore City is a place where you consistently see two sides: people who love Baltimore and people who resent Baltimore and want to move out. This thesis aspires to increase the amount of people who love Baltimore and feel a sense of pride in the city. The Be More Youth Center is a safe space to empower young minds, allowing them to unleash their energy and creativity. The park aligned with the youth center is a space that can be reclaimed and utilized for public gathering of the community. The landscape and the building are a place where residents of West Baltimore can develop a new sense of memory and belonging. I thank you all for listening to my presentation, and I welcome any comments or questions.
So we're going to use the microphone so that folks in the back and online can hear us, and just pass it amongst yourselves.
Yeah, okay. A very ambitious effort, trying to knit together three neighborhoods, remove the eyesore of the highway, make a decision about whether the highway stays or not. I think that's a big thing, and you've decided to keep the highway. Although you described it two different ways. Is it a highway to nowhere, or is it a highway to Cantonville? And its relative importance. I think I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about that. And the analysis of, I looked at the site at the last thesis round, and what a provocative site it is. To understand the three neighborhoods a little bit more, how they work, where the institutions are, where the open space is, where the commercial is, I think is, you had a diagram that showed some of the commercial and some of the institutional, but how do those neighborhoods work? How does community life work in those three neighborhoods? And what is the intention of this? To sew the neighborhoods together, to strengthen the existing neighborhoods? A little bit more discussion about that, I think would be very interesting, because I, for one, don't know how those three neighborhoods work, and I would love to. I have lots of comments about the work as it is, but talk a little bit about the three neighborhoods, the relationship of this to the three neighborhoods, and how you see the three neighborhoods functioning. And maybe if you go back to the diagram that you had of the three neighborhoods, that would be extremely helpful. I don't know what you guys think, but I think that would be extremely helpful.
This one?
That one, maybe the one with the institutional and commercial buildings on it. This one. How do these neighborhoods work? Where's the center of commercial life of Harlem Square?
So there's actually no center of commercial life in Harlem Square. The typical condition in this part of West Baltimore is corner stores, and most of them are running along this highway corridor, but a lot of them seem to be, like when I was visiting the site, seem to be closed and abandoned. So all three of these communities, although there are like more corner stores and like smaller businesses embedded in between, they are looking for like a commercial center in this neighborhood.
Yeah. Okay.
Red?
Are red apartments or schools or brick color? I guess, can you clarify what's like maybe purplish and what's red? Sorry, could you clarify what's in sort of brick color red and what's in purple, like, or some educational and some residential?
There's religious facilities, that's the like darker brick color and the dark purple. And then in the pink is healthcare facilities. Um, this color is healthcare facilities and this color is churches. Apartments. This color? Yeah, the larger apartment buildings in the area.
Okay, so you said Harlem Square doesn't necessarily have a commercial center. How do the other neighborhoods work?
It's pretty much the same
Same.
thing. None of them have like a huge commercial center. And they do have a few schools in like kind of
Yeah.
each one.
Yeah.
And kind of varying conditions, but the three in the area are open.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you diagram, and maybe it's not on this diagram, but like where, are there any other youth or libraries or some of the programs that you're putting here, do they exist in either of the three neighborhoods?
There is a
currently?
youth center or like youth facility like way down south in West Baltimore, but it's not shown in here because that would be more zoomed out.
Gotcha.
And most of the libraries are in the inner downtown area, which means people have to travel to inner downtown in order to access a library.
Gotcha. And on your plan, can you clarify for me where the library is? Because I see,
It's this one.
oh, okay. Okay. So it's there, but it's not programmed in the
Youth
main
center, no.
facility. Okay. Gotcha. Just needed that clarification. Thank you.
I think what you're hearing from the reviewers so far is needing to understand the context more. If they're not seeing it in the diagrams and on the drawings, one has to ask, have you studied it to that degree? And you've mentioned, Baltimore loving or hating it. A quick question. Are you from Baltimore?
Yes.
Yes. What part of Baltimore?
A lot of my family actually grew up in West Baltimore. I
Uh-huh.
currently live in the county.
Okay. All right. Do you spend a lot of time in West Baltimore around family?
Recently, no.
Okay. So I take it as this is something that's close to your family and it's something that you really want to understand and study and improve and contribute to. And I see that in your entire project. It is ambitious and it's well placed because of that, right? But I think what's happening is like you're providing a very outsider's view of this, and it reads through the whole plan because not only are we not finding really important analytical information initially, but even the proposal then becomes of like, oh, I just created these 7-8 empty blocks in Baltimore by covering the highway, and we can put anything we wish for over there. And then you create a checklist and you sort of put all the things that you like. I think the important part of the work here starts with the analysis, as you're hearing from a lot of the others, because then that becomes really truly informative of not only what goes there in terms of what the neighborhoods need, but also how it actually happens. So one thing I don't see on the drawings is, for example, Harlem Park. One of the issues of how it functions and what really led to the deterioration of it is those inner blocks. If you look at the geometries that are happening in the blocks there are these internal parks that when the neighborhood was laid out, were laid out as sort of like the semi-public, semi-private space that got abandoned and sort of led in, to the deterioration of that. If that is illustrated there, then I'd like to come and see then in the proposed plan there and how you're interacting with those spaces, really starting to energize them and starting to propose a different solution to that. And that's how I started reading some of the sites that you have there, a few different kind of ways of laying out the blocks, but some of them create some of these no man land spaces in the middle that were problematic specifically for Harlem Park and led to a lot of the deterioration. So it's interesting to begin to think of, if we introduce this new land and we lay it out in a different way, how do we start to strengthen that? And not only in the sense of those being well cared for spaces and planned in a way where they don't follow the same path. But then how can that start to connect and infiltrate back into the neighborhood? Because ultimately that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a connective piece. You're looking for something that improves the rest of it. So it's not really about just building one piece and then to the left and to the right, but really starting to improve what's south and north of that. So it starts with like really digging deep into what the issues are of the corresponding neighborhoods, that then starts to inform not only programmatically and kind of morphologically what goes in there, but then also like how does that start to give back to things. So it's important to, I think you have a really competent and clear presentation in terms of, you know, the institutional program. There's a good amount of residential program. You're trying with different kind of typologies of residential. So there's a really good wish list that I think if you ask anyone there will say yes, 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 and yes. So to that degree, it's covering a lot of solid ground. But I think what it's starting to miss is a little bit of that deeper tissue thinking and studying of like what actually doesn't work. How can I improve on that? How can I really celebrate it into what I have and then continue to improve the areas? One last comment, and I'll give it to the others, is that then when we go to the more zoomed in version, you know, the kind of the couple of blocks that you developed more architecturally and a little bit more from kind of trying to shape the spaces and experiences around them, you really start to see that there's this very macro thinking, kind of touching things very generally on a map, kind of on a larger plan. But even when you come to kind of the block making and the plan of this, I worry about, you said like there was this like interaction between landscape and the building. And I can start to see it maybe a little bit on that courtyard level where some of the spaces are looking into it. I do worry a little bit about this massive periphery around 2 blocks that doesn't have any entries or any kind of external interaction back into the neighborhood. It's sort of like a deep buffer of lawn and trees as it is now. And I wonder if this design and this program can also be a little bit more extroverted so that, again, it's not just about filling in and building out a few blocks. It's really about starting to connect to north and south and what's happening there instead of creating kind of what is now a pretty sharp edge around it. So I think what you're hearing a little bit is like, we want to know more. We want to really understand what's happening north and south, what works, what doesn't. And then those are the things you want to pick up some of the strengths, bring them here, and then really start to strategize. Then what are the things I can come up with that not only work on this block, but really start to change it for everybody else.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a few questions about the process and the way in which you thought about the development of the design and analyzing the site. In starting from your title, you're talking about a lost community. What is that lost community? Is it people in the 3 neighborhoods?
Yeah.
Or so the 3 neighborhoods.
Yes.
So and the key issue now is what? Lack of services, for example, or no connectivity, or lack of public space, or what is the key issue in the 3 neighborhoods?
I would say there's a kind of a mixture of what you were just saying. In terms of connectivity, because it created this like giant opening in the middle of West Baltimore, which you can see in like the like figure ground. There's like this, I highlighted in red, but it's like this huge blank space in the figure ground of the site. And there's a lack of, although there are like a few parks around the site, there's a lack of like this connectivity of green spaces in general.
Okay, since you raise connectivity issue, now I just want to ask you about, you mentioned stitching, right? So how does that manifest vertically, north, south, and east, west, through your projects, not through the main roads?
Yes, through the project.
How that plays in your project?
So in terms of like the north-south connection, I did a deep dive of like what was there previously prior to the highway being built. And there were actually some streets that were taken away to build this highway. So I did bring some of those streets back. One of those streets were the pedestrian path that is running through the center in front of the youth center. I decided to keep that as a pedestrian path because if most of the traffic would be coming from students because there's a school directly along that same street to the south and directly along the same street to the north.
Okay, but schools are visited in specific times of the day, right?
Mhm.
So what's gonna attract the community from the neighborhoods to your project?
I was thinking that the materiality of the gym, mostly students need a place to go after school. A lot of times they're just kind of like out on the streets and don't have anywhere to go.
Okay. So now, this relates to your thinking about the project. You mentioned that you learned from the literature, the root shock.
Mhm.
What did you learn from it?
So there's a book by Mindy Love called Root Shock, and in that book, she was actually talking about a bunch of cases in different cities where the same thing happened, where these highways were pushed through minority neighborhoods and they kind of just lost everything. So I learned that root shock is this like reaction to the loss and kind of how from that point where they lost everything, everything kind of decays out.
Okay. Does the book offer solutions or ideas for solutions? Or no?
A lot of it was discussing like having community involved in planning processes.
Okay, that's a very important point. So now, one of the issues in your precedents, which relate to the book and relate to your intervention in this context with the three neighborhoods, is that you mentioned that you learned from precedents about mixed use, about human-centered design, about social connectivity, right? So those are three important elements that you learned from precedents. Two questions here. Was there anything about the process in the precedents that engages with the community?
Um, that mostly showed up in Clyde Warren Park, which is in Dallas, because it was the kind of exact same condition. It's a highway that they built a park over, and it did have like one single building on it. But from that, they learned that they were able to connect both sides of the city back together that way, and it became this giant community park in the middle that a lot of people loved, and it was really successful.
Okay, but were there any participation, co-creation elements in the precedents as the book calls for?
From what I read, they did talk to the community in order
Right.
to like
Okay.
determine what to do.
So now, did you talk to the community?
I did talk to a lot of like close family and friends that still live in West Baltimore.
Okay.
That's kind of how I started the process and determined some of the like programmatic elements. I spent a lot of time asking people like what they thought the community needed, and a lot of people said somewhere for the youth to go.
Okay, so the library, what else in your project?
Museum,
Museum.
local museum.
Are manifestations of what people need or
Yes,
think they need.
yes.
Okay. Just it's good that you thought about the programming and the program at a master planning level and at a building level, which is important to do that. But definitely, I would second the view of that connectivity and having these edges to your buildings. Don't give enough opportunities for engagement north-south and attraction to your project and from your project to the neighborhoods. So that's, I think it's a really important point. So there are keywords, excellent ones, really. Repair, reclaim, empower, cultivate, revive. Excellent. And I just want to say, what makes your project doing all of these things? Can you just identify a couple of elements that talk to these concepts or these ideas?
Yeah. So in terms of reviving culture identity, I mentioned the elevations. A lot of times in Baltimore, as you're driving around, you see murals all over the city. So the idea behind the elevations was to like revive the cultural identity of Baltimore by placing these elevations along the main streets of the facade that people are driving past all the time. In terms of like reclaiming space, I felt as though having the park embedded and then it's this community park that people can come to, and also like kind of a open space park that allows people to come and do what they want there, whether it's like having a community event, having a cookout or something like that. It allows them to reclaim this space as theirs that was once theirs, but it was taken from them. And overall, the youth center is about empowering children to kind of think beyond just finishing high school and thinking beyond to like going to college or more.
Okay. It's important that you're addressing the youth as an important population in your project. That's important. Typically, when we talk about special populations, we either focus on children or elderly, and there is a big segment that we tend to, I don't know, avoid or oversimplify, but I think there is a good element there. Overall, the presentation and the project is really well laid out and it's interesting, but I think there are some missed opportunities in terms of engaging more with the neighborhoods, engaging more with the north-south directions. And through your projects also, the idea of empowerment, especially in this context, I would say would be really important. More or better documented in terms of engaging with the community, how we do that. Not necessarily through participation exercises, but also through, could be sort of interviews and talking to people and how that translates into the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking us through all the research and looking at it at the master plan, urban scale, and then getting to the building. And I ditto what everyone's been saying. I hadn't realized during your presentation about the sectional change across the particular site that you had selected. And I was originally a little distressed about the service basement because of the highway underneath. And so I wanted to, I was sort of figuring it out about how much grade actually changes by your elevations. And I think tying in with the discussion about knitting or stitching or zippering with the neighborhood and, the opportunities that you have to engage from the street or from a more private community area that you've created with this sort of pedestrian plaza between the two streets and the more public and the more private sections. I think you have an opportunity that is a little too tentative, and you could have taken it further sectionally in your building and on that site, on both blocks. A block is a pretty big area. Essentially a one-level youth center is a little bit of a missed opportunity, I think, for economics. And I understand, well, I'm assuming, I'm putting words in your mouth, that maybe you wanted to keep the public from the library and the museum separate from the youth center. And I think architecturally you could merge even the parts of the library or the library with that in that block and still create more activation and use more of that section. Because I think, as you see in the elevations, people are walking along some long sections of a block, and it's really a blank wall. And I understand the need for service, but I just think that's a little bit of a missed opportunity. And the other missed opportunity, I would say, and again, it might be just you were designing at a civic scale and then into the building scale, but having more recreational opportunities in the private courtyard, but also just in the rest of the site, basketball, pickleball, little play areas for middle school and adults and children. All of that also, I think, is probably needed, not just the gym. So I really appreciate your idea of using the gym as like a beacon and a billboard and a welcoming, transparent box to bring people in, but it's sort of tucked in a sense, and you have, 3 more sides of this building block of this building that could architecturally also do that, which I know you're using some murals right now, but I just worry that the big stair is potentially even more of a separator than a invitation in to the building. And so I just think sectionally, I don't know if, I guess I was curious if you had a chance to look at the section more and decided instead to really plinth the site in a sense? Like what, is that something that you had time to think about more?
I did consider like adding more program underneath the building, but I was concerned about like the levels of light that would be able to get in. Which is why I just ended up with the loading on that portion of the
Gotcha.
building.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the programs that you're bringing to the site are spot on fantastic. I just, and I appreciate the idea of the phasing. I think that's a really smart, realistic solution that you need to consider. So I applaud you for that too. So thank you.
The comment that this looks like an outsider designing this and not somebody that is familiar with the neighborhood, I think is spot on. If I were going to be, how do you say, rough, tough, I would say this project is hostile to the neighborhood. It's hostile. When I look at this elevation and think that this is one of the principal streets in the neighborhood, I'm surprised. When I look at this elevation and see that this is one of the principal streets in the neighborhood, I'm surprised. And I'll say, despite the mural, I say that about that also. There's no great love of the street, and I think, urban design in the neighborhood is embrace the street, embrace the street, embrace the street. Have you embraced the street? And I think that you've made every decision to remove your presence on the street, introverting this, not utilizing in any real way, the two little open spaces that you make north and south, is not outreach. This project has to outreach to the neighborhood. How do you outreach to the neighborhood? How do you make something that just as much as you possibly can embrace the fabric around, embrace the streets around, and that's, the principal, comment about how do these neighborhoods work and how do I reinforce how these neighborhoods work? Your diagram that shows that this neighborhood, at least diagrammatically, comes to here, and that neighborhood is here and that neighborhood here, maybe says Mulberry Street isn't the same as Franklin Street. These aren't equal. Maybe they're equal, maybe they're not equal. Maybe this more belongs to this neighborhood. Maybe, this project, I think, needs to be more extroverted and have a way that really embraces the context and makes something out of the context. And so I look for something that's more biased, one side to the other side, something that takes a stand on Mulberry Street and Franklin Street, and something that's just extroverted. We need something that's extroverted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've had some very direct critique here. So I would like to return to the beginning of your presentation. I think you did a great, clear analysis at the very beginning in those first few minutes that you missed. I'm familiar with Poppleton, so I understand the violence that's been perpetrated on this neighborhood. You were perhaps just a little bit too intellectual about it. I mean, that rending the urban fabric was a terrible act of violence that tore, the community apart along that rift. There are 3 different names for the communities, but it used to be a place that was stitched together. So you recognize that and, you're working to repair. So just a few suggestions about how you can continue this for your portfolio. You began with a good overview. And then you zoomed into the building. I think that it would have been fabulous if you could have then zoomed out again and said, so now, let's see all these problems of this community ripped apart and how I'm making changes. So, you've got the green zone. You could have shown how that was connected. I think since you were focused on children, showing, just diagramming where the schools, how do kids walk from the school to this center after school would have, would be a good diagram to include. So my big suggestion really is you start with the macro, you zoom into the micro, and then you zoom back out to the macro. Because I think, I don't dispute the critiques. I think, there's, you've heard a lot that's really valid and important, but I do think that you want to present your project in the most compelling possible light. And I think really taking advantage of your analytical abilities, not just at the beginning to set the stage, but at the end to show us, like what happened after this play. And just one more thought for you. And that is, if you had some diagrams about the history, what was great before, this violent act happened, then what happened, what's it like now, and what's it like in, in the future that you're proposing, and how will it continue? Because I think that's an important part of cities is you make an intervention and things happen. So what else, could happen based on what you're proposing? So don't stop. Keep it up. You clearly love Baltimore. Baltimore needs architects who care. And yeah, I'll pass it on.
Yeah, Tajay, I really appreciate some of the comments and building on your comment. I think as you know, I told you about my colleague Sarsfield, who's been doing a lot of rebuilding in West Baltimore and is from here. And then one of the big things he spoke about was the drug epidemic and how a lot of the men of his age didn't live past that. But that when he was growing up, those small stores and the sense of adults there that you could go into and how important that was in trying to bring that back. And I want to build on your comment because I think and also I would say that a mural is not a representation of culture. In a way, a mural is a Band-Aid because people can't fix more than that. And so to create a street where people know that if their mother's not watching out for them, that store, is, and they'll give them the bubble gum or whatever, and having those adults and having those things that was part of this community. And my sense is in part of this, it's almost like a fort. Let's protect people. So you're focusing on that inner safe space. And let's assume that's there. But now, like, what if these were a bunch of bodegas, right, along this street, or opportunities for small businesses? What if this area here does become this wonderful park that bridges across, right? How do you bring some of that small scale life? And again, I do think that the murals are a response when people can't do anything. If there's places for food, if there's, feel safe for your child to play there, there's eyes on the street. And so now, just to kind of build on that idea, I think it's really going back and saying, and the comments about that elevation, right? How do we bring that back? And how do we start, breaking this down again? This library, has a facade, and maybe there's a pilot library in the neighborhood here, and that they have vans that go around, right? And so expanding as you talk about it, because I know you feel it, right? The richness of the culture and this creating the spaces and the small scale but repeated opportunities for the community to build. And I think that
Yes, I just want to second and elaborate on that. I'm sorry I missed your initial analysis. I'm not doubting the fact that you learned a lot about the neighborhood. What the neighborhoods, what we're needing here is really being able to communicate it visually and in a way that really starts to inform your design so that no one is asking, well, whatever it is you learn, how is that reflected here? That's really what you're looking to stitch. And I want to give you a way of doing that because again, you took on a really difficult problem. There's been a lot of people trying to figure out what to do over this highway over the years. The communities that are around there have banded together over many years to work on that. So there's all of that work, right? But there's also the reality of those neighborhoods today. There's love in those neighborhoods. There is love. People do things there all the time. Like, for example, in Mulberry down south, like just I can point to the blocks that you have there. They're wonderful community gardens with like the greenhouses and all of that. There's multiple organizations that have, early childhood development and a lot of other things that run out of there that are already actively working on a very micro scale because they don't have the ability to develop large, but it's happening. So there is a green network plan for this whole entire area that in fact stitches that, right? And so that was done with a lot of community input. So there's a lot of like really quick shortcuts to what's actually happening today, what people are thinking, because you can't necessarily convene community meetings and gather that data firsthand. You're working in a very limited amount of time. But I'm wondering, like, even if that, green network plan with all of the little community gardens and all of the green trails and stuff like that overlays over the framework that you have, how would that begin to transform it? Because as I mentioned before, you have a good program. You have kind of a clear sense of density and kind of how you want to start to programmatically kind of stitch things up, but you're probably needing a few of those overlays that then, and you with an open mind, you go like, nothing I've drawn is concrete, it's just the starting point. Then all of those things try to make things that much more specific. So you're starting to now work with specificity. So for example, that little community garden that's 2 blocks down from that building that you're designing, that starts to really work in concert with everything. And it starts to inform then how does this edge work? Like what kind of connection happens? So take it simply as a very ambitious project on a larger scale with a great starting point of a program, but it needs these more current, real-time, real-life overlays that then bring that life into it and start to design all of that specificity. It's just the next level of development of the project. There's only so much you can do in a semester or two, but it's also as you progress forward as a professional and thank you, I'll take care of it. As a professional and as a designer in the future, know that that richness is built iteratively. You're never going to get to this like super rich project like on that first pass. It's always going to start very diagrammatically with really great analysis that leads you to some key points. And then from there, it will iterate and it will start to overlay things and really build that richness. So good work. Thank you.
One more comment, and then TJ will wrap it up.
Told I have to be brief. I do think I think we might call a moratorium on thesis projects on this site for a few years, because I think this site is deceptively difficult. And not necessarily for reasons of the highway, for reasons of these neighborhoods on either side. Because I think the problem here is that these are very fragile neighborhoods and they have been decimated by a lot of things, right? And these neighborhoods, we're trying to put them back together piece by piece. It's very incremental, step by step, like you say, little gardens and things like that. And that's been effective to some degree. If you look at what the state has done with revitalization efforts in the mayor's office and stuff, that's been good. And the Harlem Park itself has its own history of problems. The interblock parts, the townhouses were too big, 4,500 square feet, they were enormous and stuff. I do think, though, with all this territory between these two, there's a temptation to say, oh, we have this big territory between the two. If we put a lot of stuff there, we can begin to fix it. It's like a critical mass. And I think that that's kind of one way you could go, right? You could go and say, we can fill all this in and that would be a good thing and that would help stitch these two things together. So I think there's a sort of, sort of temptation here, which is very, very great in terms of this project. I think it would have been interesting to think of this project if you just said to yourself, I'm just going to limit myself to that, or some smaller area. Because in the end of the day, if something was decked over here, it probably wouldn't be done all at once, number one. Number two, I think it might make sense there because of the relationship to this park and the closed school, and you could have some iterations about what you could do there. The last thing I would say is that I think your project, although it seeks to do urban design, I think you have a kind of very modernist idea about urban design in a sense that you have buildings per block. And in the city, oftentimes you have institutional buildings occupying the same block as residential buildings. And the fabric is a little more cohesive that way. So for example, it would have been interesting to say, if you had a library, maybe it only occupies that much space and the rest would be either residential and things. And that would give you some sense of kind of how you make both sides of the street. I mean, now I have houses looking, I don't know, this is multifamily there, but I would try to maybe make the transitions in the alleys, not on the streets, so that there was a more harmonious streetscape. That sort of thing would probably be a more, an urban approach that would be less about different buildings per block and going back to what Rob was saying about really understanding how you make streets in the city, and that would really help things accordingly. I do think finally, part of the problem here is the built-in symmetry of this with this street and this street causes things to sort of arrive symmetrical like that, and you really have to work hard not to do that or find reasons not to do that, and I think it might have helped a little. That's as brief as I can do, Peter. I'm sorry.
Pretty good, Matt. TJ is gonna give us a closing comment.
I'll try to brief. It's funny that I was on phone call with a design principal friend in Chicago yesterday, and he was going after a project in Texas, which is exactly like this, covering up a highway with a park, it was park. So I had a rich conversation about that whole thing, talking about your project here. So thank you for that. And then it's almost very much educational to me. You think through this, I'm reading through those languages again, like repairing, empowering, reclaiming, reviving, and cultivating the wounded, historical wounded, and then distressed neighborhood, which was very educational. I drove through this neighborhood so many times that it's almost shame that I never thought about anything about that neighborhood. So thank you for taking us through this space and this thorough process that you went through. And you heard many comments today that you probably started thinking that why didn't I include that diagram, this diagram, that diagram? Because there were a lot of things that she went through. Some incorporated, some not, some presented well. Saying that it also embraces the importance of the presentation, that knowing that you are presenting to the group of people, understanding the group of people, and preparing your presentation based that will be very important. And there are a lot of potentials that we heard that could be improving your project. So hopefully you'll take some time to improve it when you put it into your portfolio. I had a privilege to work with you in undergrad and this past year. And well, there are many things that I was impressed by you. One thing that I really impressed both time was that you are very well organized, that you always set the milestone schedules and then you stick with that and you go with that and try to finish up everything, which I think are wonderful strengths that I don't have. As you know, that my desk tend to be always go to like 6, 7, 8 p.m. So I wish that you will keep embracing your strengths, and then you also expanding that ability into multiple different directions, and then adding more bandwidth and qualities and skill sets. And I'm sure that will only help you go further in your next steps. I'm looking forward for your next steps, how it goes. Keep me posted. And thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to pivot to the west, and Wenji Zhuang will present her thesis. Wenji's thesis was chaired by Ronit Eisenbach, and Brittany Williams and Mohammed Garapur were also on the committee.
Thank you.
It'll be over in an hour. You got this.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I would also like to give Pavlina a proper introduction. Pavlina Ilyeva is a co-founder and principal of PIKL Architects, an award-winning firm in Baltimore. Thank you for joining us. And again, Wenji's thesis committee was made up of Chair Ronit Eisenbach, and she was joined on the committee by Brittany Williams and Director Mohammed Garapur.
Hi, my name is Wenjie. Today I'm going to present my thesis design for neurodiversity, an autism-inclusive elementary school. Table of contents. So, my thesis start with the thesis goal and some background information. I got my thesis abstracts. After that, going deeper on the research, I got my program and picking the project site to do my elementary school. What is autism? The scientific definition of autism is a neurological and developmental disorder that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave, and where an unfriendly built environment can lead to a profound sensory overload. Therefore, my thesis goal is to create autism-friendly and supportive school environments rooted in neurodiversity. Some background information. Today, 1 in 36 8-year-old children have been identified with autism spectrum disorder, and then 90 to 95% of them experience the sensory processing difference, which include the hyperreactivity and the hyporeactivity. And then 95% of children on spectrum, they entirely relied on the public educational system, and only under 3% of them can access to the private care. And then the autistic students number still growing in the public educational system. So the public education is the necessity, is not a choice. However, children with spectrum experience a lot of challenges in the public school. The first one is the physical environment. The public school environment often fail to support the neurocognitive accessibility and the sensory needs. The second one is the one-size-fits-all teaching approach that overlooks the diverse learning needs. And then the last one is the social challenge and the bullying. So my thesis abstract is to use architecture to shift the educational model from the forced integration to the selective integration, and achieving the balance between the overarching structure and the flexibility, individual flexibility. Based on the literature review and the precedent studies I did, they all improved the autistic learning environment should reject the one-size-fits-all solution and use the school as the active therapeutic tool to help. I summarized a few design principles from this literature and the precedent studies. The first principle is the predictability. Study shows the autistic learning environment should follow a predictable design principle that help to reduce the cognitive stress. The predictability can reflect on the clear, predictable circulation and also on the program. For example, like in the Ninja Autistic School, so it has modular learning and the support space, and it also has very clear spatial sequencing. And also predictability can show in the wayfinding. And the study shows the color property retains stronger neural recall than the spatial attributes in children. So color gonna be very useful in the wayfinding. For example, like in the Sankey Ragpa Spatial School in India, so it used the color and the graphic on the ground to help students to realize their classrooms. And also for the 10% center and the autism neurodevelopment. So it used large light color wood material as the background and it used the green color to highlight the escape space here. So the second principle is having the sensory escape space. The sensory escape space with strict acoustical and visual privacy is critical for autistic children to mitigate the sensory overload and regain the emotional control. And then the sensory escape space can be different sized and distributed into different spaces with different privacy level. And they also sometimes can help with different tools or fabric to promote the self-regulation. The last one is having the outdoor recovery space. The green space creates a restorative environments that reduce stress and support students' well-being. And then for outdoor space, it can be integrated with the running space and have the clear visual connection for passive supervision. And also it can have the variety degree of the enclosure and the privacy. Based on this study, I got my program for the neurodiverse education wing, which it should have an individual entrance and have the learning zone and the support zone. And besides of these three main zones, the escape zone and the green zone and the sensory zone, it can establish into different places, and then the green zone can be connected with the natural environment. Narrowed down to the sensory zone, it can collaborate with color lighting, acoustic system, and the tactile system. To test my thesis, I picked the Western Virginia as my site. So the Western is a planned community which is about the radical inclusion, social equity, and then the design principle is really focused on the diversity, affordable housing, the dignity of individual. So people want to live and work in the same community and they try to balance the beauty in between the architecture and the nature. My project is to redesign the Lake Ann Elementary School. Lake Ann Elementary School funding and the construction in 1960. Today it faces a lot of challenges, like structural obsolescence. So the image above is from the 1960, and then the below image is today. So the build addition caused the compromised green and then the loss of courtyards. And also it damaging the predictability of program and the circulation. Little bit side context. Today, the tree canopy of the Lake Ann community is about 53%, and based on the master plan of the Lake Ann community, so 25% of land use must be in the public open space. And then the urban pattern for the Lake Ann community is high density master use. And it has different type of townhouse and the single house, and also it has different size. So the idea is to provide affordable housing to every people across the race, across different class. And the residential cluster are tightly integrated with the commercial amenity, which is the Lake Ann Plaza here. Also, Lake Ann community has completed pedestrian-led walk. The school also have the walk and roll program, which encourages students to walk to the school and reduce the family's commuting stress. My design concept is to design two running ecosystem which connect by the shared court and use the building to bridge the school and the community. To study in the school community integration, I did two president study, which in Japan. So they all located in the high density community and they all use the roofscape as the public open space. My project party inspired by the community design and then the site condition. So there are 3 existing trails which connect to the site. And also for this trail, it has different underpass and the bridge with public arts. So it separated the pedestrian and the traffic. So children can walk to school safely and having fun. And the building form inspired by the surrounding building and then the Lake Ann Plaza used the curved form to shape the outdoor open space. And the Lake Ann Plaza has the primary outdoor open space. So the idea for this project is to use the roofscape as the secondary outdoor open space. So there are 2 main courtyard which is shaped by the general education wing and then the neurodiverse education wing. Here's the diagram on the aerial view. The orange color is the general education wing, and then the yellow color is the neurodiverse education wing. In between is the public shared core and then the main entrance. Children in the neurodiverse education wing, they can access to the public resource and in the general education based on the social engagement level. So the roofscape has several different gathering space and also it connect to the existing trail. So here's the detail about in the roofscape. We can see the different group seating and the individual seating area. And then the existing tree can also function as the boundary. And then when people get into the site, the transparent library can be here as the civic identity. And then the circulation on the roof is highly aligned with the building circulation. Here's the building plans. The topo slope down from the street to the back, and here's the main entrance. These green spaces are the kindergarten to 5th grade classrooms. So after school time, they can lock down the classrooms. So people from community, they can access to the gym, library, and the cafeteria. And here's another individual entrance to the neurodiverse education wing. The entry level for the neurodiverse education wing is pretty public. So it has the support programs which open to children from our community. For example, like the social skill development program, life skill development program. So children from our community, they can also access to the affordable education here. When people get into the building, here's more open space like conference room, parents resource room, and the reception. And going deeper is the support program, and then the IEP classrooms. For the lower ground floor plan, so it's more private. It has the autistic classrooms and some private support program like sensory gym and a children room. And then the distributed administration space help to monitor children's school life. To achieve the predictability, I designed the circulation as a loop, and also I designed the tactile guidance on the wall. So it helped to provide the tactile stimuli as children moving. So it created the predictability in the circulation. For WIC funding, I use the color-coded and the graphic identity strategy in the classroom area, so children can see what color of their classroom, so they can create a special spatial identity. And for predictability in program, there is a modular design in classrooms. So for each two room, it has shared support space, which include the restroom, storage, and the retreat room. So, and also it has group learning and the individual learning, which divided by the furniture and connected with the outdoor classroom. So here's the perspective from the classroom. So students inside the classroom, they can access, visually they can access to the outdoor green. And also I use the acoustic wood panels and the ceiling couch to help with the noise control. There are three typical type of sensory escape space in this building. The first one is collaborated with the circulation. It's more private and next to the learning space. So, but it has several different openings, so students in the safe space, but they can still see what happens outside. For the second type is the sitting niches, which trying to create a protective feeling in the space, and also children can focus on the reading and avoid the visual connection. The third type is located in the group socializing and the dining area. So the idea is create a small room in a bigger room. So I used solid material CMU and wood panels to create the grounded feeling. And also there are three important outdoor green recovery space which relate with the neurodiverse education. The first one is the diverse education courtyard. For the diverse education courtyard, it connects with the natural wooden environment, but it has the physical boundary to keep the safety. So children can access from the neurodiverse education wing, and also it connects with the administration space. So teachers can monitor the outdoor activity. The second one is the sensory garden. Sensory garden has three main zones. The first one has fountain. Children can hear and they touch the water. The second one is a garden. Children can smell the flower and see different colors. The third one is about play and touch. There's a climbing wall. Besides of these three main zones, it has several different sized sitting niches which shaped by the vegetation. The last one is the modular outdoor classroom. So it has trees to separate in the pedestrian in the trail and the children, and also it provides shading in the morning. In general, these strategies are really helpful to design the autism-friendly space. And also, these strategies can not only used in the neurodiverse education, but also can apply into the general education. So when children ready for the integration, and there's also a friendly space ready for them too. Thank you.
Who would like the microphone first?
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for walking us so carefully through your work. I think this certainly is a very kind of manageable, well-contained, well-considered project. And you had a very clear thread between some of your findings and research and the specific points that you found significant and how sort of they found their way into the project. There's a very clear thread when it comes to that. And it just kept reminding me when I was listening to you is that many times when as designers, as architects, as we're, come to a project, we have to become instant experts in one topic or another. And this is an example of really diving into a particular topic with its design implications and really giving yourself enough tools with which now you can address the project. So I think you've done that quite well. So some of the things that I want to comment very quickly, and because I want to hear from the other panelists as well, is that you have taken on a site and also fully transformed it, both in terms of the type of architecture that replaced the old, but also, from the geometry, from the morphology, and from how it all, sort of feels and looks, but also from this idea that education, it's funny, like we're trying to move away from one size fits all kind of education, but this one is actually including everybody, but managing it in a way where everyone's sort of differences are considered. So I find that the most compelling part of your project, the fact that you're sort of working with two pieces that may appear separate, but you've designed kind of this piece in between that allows for this interaction and for this selective kind of integration or back and forth, which I think is where the innovation in this project starts to happen on that programmatic level. So I was pretty excited to see that. I'm curious, one thing you didn't spend a lot of time on, and maybe you can touch a little bit on, is you showed us briefly an example from a project in Japan that had a circular school. And, I wonder kind of what are the things you took away from that, kind of the analytical part of it? Was it just the habitable roof, or were there other things that were working? And I ask that because when I transition into the building that you've illustrated, there's a lot of things that I enjoy about how they're handled. It's really hard to design circular buildings and circular spaces, as I'm sure you found out. There's a right or a wrong way of doing it. The hard part certainly is to try to make square rooms out of a circular plan. And you've handled that quite elegantly by maintaining the kind of the circulation through the buildings and really honoring the geometry and allowing the spaces to be shaped by that. And even the exterior spaces, and some of your images that you had on screen, it's the way the solid shapes the void and it maintains that language is really quite elegant throughout, and how the rest of the programmatic pieces fit within that. The only place where I feel like that it could be maybe worked a little bit more to maintain that is this front edge here. There's this arrival driveway that seems to become like very tight on the building. Everything else is generous and kind of sitting and flowing through the site. And this starts to compress things quite a bit, especially when some of these entry elements start to work. And this is probably the only square shape that I saw, which was this vestibule. There was a little box sticking out. I think there's a moment of kind of finesse that can emerge in this initial approach to the building that can really honor the geometry. And my last comment related to that would be, there's so many wonderful spaces. I can really see how you're thinking about the experiences throughout the building. And this is huge because that's what this project is about. And so I'm wondering if, and this is more for future presentations, and as you continue to develop as a designer and architect is take us through the building, like tell us the story. How does one arrive and how do you come in and what do you see? Do you see the garden and then which way do you go? I feel like these are really nice episodes throughout the building, but if you give us kind of this narrative of movement that then flows with the actual geometry of the building, it just takes both the presentation but our understanding and appreciation of it to that next level. So use that to your advantage. Tell us the story. Tell us how one goes through the day and experiences kind of this flow and the nature around it and how you've connected all these spaces. I think that continuity would be really wonderful to hear. If I have to APK on something, and I have to, I would say that I really appreciated a lot of the thoughtfulness about the application of materials, especially as they relate to addressing kind of the learning differences and the experiences through these spaces. But I can't help but notice sort of this monotonous grid that ran through a lot of the visuals. And I realized that this being kind of the circular building, that's a pretty dominant piece element in the whole design. And I wonder if there's spaces where it should be treated differently and other places maybe it is a little bit more generic and a little bit more recessive. So that's something that I'm starting to look as I look through the spaces is, all right, we've designed the specialty items. How about the rest of it? What is the primary architecture like? What is that overhead plane that is going to define the round circulation and all that? Is it just a ceiling grid or is there opportunities to express the building a little bit more? So those are kind of the areas where I can see it really sort of starting to jump to the next level. Great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think the idea of transforming the site completely and bringing such a natural, like organic approach. I really appreciate your diagram that you have there on the site-informed part T about bringing the trail connections and, giving some justification to bringing people up onto the roof of the building and shaping the landscape the way that you did. I do feel like, and this is maybe building on a comment from the last one, is that then continue to diagram how it ties in with these outdoor play areas and the sensory, I'm assuming this is the sensory garden that you highlighted.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't see any connections unless I'm making it up. Maybe that's the connection. It's not strong enough. And I think that's just as important as the interior focused outdoor spaces that you've created. So I think tying that through even more would bring it more richness. And I have a couple questions because we're actually doing a lot of schools, and we do a lot of schools now with neurodiverse programs integrated in some way or another. And all the school systems in the area are trying to navigate this right now and figure out, is it fully integrated into what you're calling like gen ed? Where are the snozzling spaces in this side or the escape areas on this side? Because learning does take place everywhere and all sorts of people need different ways of learning and teaching. And so by only having some of those spaces over here might be a missed opportunity. I would think like truly integrating it, you could start to integrate it over on this side as well. Maybe there's more of a focus or rigidity to it over here, but having some of that diagram, like some of these spaces happen all the way through the building, I think is a question I probably might pose to you of like, why stop here? And then also the connection between the two. I know it looks like you have the dining underneath the, this courtyard play area. And so I was curious about like daylight and access. I mean, structure a little bit, like just for reality, it's a very thin structure. I mean, there'd be a lot of thickness there, could be quite compressed, maybe not a very nice space underground. So I know it looks like, there's such whimsy and delight and a lot of beautiful spaces in here. And I really appreciate the way that you've color coded it. It's very easy to read, but I just feel like there's some shared space or even gen ed space that maybe could benefit from some of that thinking. Because there's some interesting ways that things like dining and gym and art and STEAM and everything could also bridge the gap or be inclusive and knit together all of that, because some of the things about smaller escape spaces and acoustical and tactile treatments play into those larger spaces as well. And maybe that's just a continuation of how you design this, but kudos to taking this on. I think it's fantastic and very relevant. I just would argue you could push it even further.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much for addressing this topic. And I just want to start with some design issues and not talking about the whole project, but maybe a few points here and there. And I would relate very much to some of the comments that were mentioned before. The sense of arrival. How do people arrive at the site? Where is the drop-off, pick-up these points? Where is it?
So for the general education part, people arrive from here and they get out here, and oh no, they can get out here, and then for the autistic education, they can access here and they get out from the middle.
Okay, so basically this is the arrival points or two arrival points for, yeah, if they come by car. Okay, if they go pedestrian or no, or they don't go from the neighborhood next to the project, is there a way to access the project not by car?
Yes. So it has 3 existing trail connect to the school, and so
Where is that?
oh,
Show us. Hmm?
so here in the diagram, there are 2 existing trail on the street side, and then 1 trail from the back side.
Okay. When you were studying the, as mentioned, there is a lot of school design everywhere in the world. Have you come across different classroom prototypes that go beyond the modular classroom and just rectangular classroom, especially for autistic children? Like L-shaped classrooms, like rectangular classrooms that provide different types of experiences. In your research and your investigation of precedents, have you come across that? No?
I haven't think about that.
Wendy, the question was whether in your research, did you find examples where there were different kinds of classrooms than the one you adopted in terms of their shapes or
Prototypes.
similar structures?
Oh, yeah, so for most presidents I studied, then they all use the rectangular classrooms, and also some with the modular small space.
Okay, so the difference in your design between the rectangular classroom for mainstream students and a different type of classroom for autistic children is different. So how you are treating the classrooms differently? Is it only through the form, the shape, the floor plan, or? Yeah.
I think the microphone. The classroom, so it can use the furniture to divide the thing, so it can make the flexibility, so students can have more fighting space in the classroom.
Can you tell us a bit more about the benefits of double-loaded corridors and single-loaded corridors and how that play, like in the left side of the school, you have double-loaded corridors, classrooms on both sides. And this side, you don't have that. Why? Does it offer any opportunities for autistic children or?
Yes. For the autistic wing, so I decided to use the single row corridor because I wanted to reduce the cognitive stress which produced by the circulation. And also it gives more free space to create in the escape space, which can be like embedded in the wall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One final thing about the vertical connectivity. How do people navigate to different levels? Through what?
They navigated to different levels through the elevator and the stair.
Okay. So everybody navigates through that.
Which ways you mean? Like,
I'm just asking, you just show us.
yes. For general education, like here's the public elevator
Mhm.
and the elevator and the stair they can access to the public resource in the classrooms. And for here, it has the large stair here and then the elevator.
Okay. Just one final comment. In any school environment, we have different types of users, right? We have children or students, but we also have teachers, we have managers. So, and the experience of teachers would be very important to look at, especially in terms of supervising autistic children, supervising children of a specific age group. So what is the experience of a teacher here?
The experience of the
Teacher
teachers.
entering the building, that side or that side.
Teacher can also enter in the building by the entrance, but the administration space distributed into several different space, and also it has staff rest break space and help them to get out of the teaching mode for a while and take a break.
Okay, and how do they supervise children in the classrooms? How do they supervise children in the classroom? Like where is the position of teachers within these classrooms?
And so for the IEP program, the teacher's position is from this side, so they can monitoring what happened there and they see the outdoor view. And also from the lower level, they can monitoring the outdoor activity from this side. And they also see the individual learning and the group learning space.
Okay. No, I think as a user group for a school of this nature, I think looking at the teacher or teachers would be really very important too, because learning doesn't take place only in the classroom, it takes place in other spaces too. So how teachers engage or position themselves in terms of supervision, navigating around through children and through the spaces would be important to think of as part of the teaching experience, not learning experience, but teaching experience from a teacher perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you for this. You know, I do think that you did a lot of research, and I think you have, it's been said, a very sensitive notion about materiality and wayfinding. I'm wondering if you've hung out in a school of neurodiverse children. Have you?
No.
I think that would be very important.
Yeah.
My son goes to Ivy Mount. Okay. I drop him off and I pick him up every day. It's really something to see that. You know, and it's a combined school. You know, I think it's important for you know, typical student to know what that is, you know, to interact and interface with these people. So that kind of an institution is monstrously important. You know, it's really, you know, when you talk about the teachers, you know, it's all about the teachers. You know, it's the people that make the institution, not necessarily the physical plant. You know, my son's been at 3 different schools. There's a school on H Street called School Within a School, which is very interesting. That's one model. It was a kind of repurposed building from the late 50s, I think, early 60s. And the people were wonderful. You know, it wasn't supportive enough as a facility, and as, you know, the teachers weren't there to offer the amount of support that some of the students needed. And he's been to other ones that also didn't offer, you know, kind of enough support. So going and seeing how it works is very important for you. You know, so I admire the idea, absolutely. Arrival and drop off, I think, is not convincing. Parking, not convincing. Relationship to the outdoor spaces, not necessarily convincing. But I think the least convincing part is one that you have invested, I think, some energy in, but maybe not enough, and that's the roofscape. You know, there's a lot of space around this building, and there's a lot of love put into this, and there's almost no love put into the roofscape. And the roofscape is a big gesture for you. It's a big gesture for you, right? I mean, that's an important part of your building. What happens up there?
So it can be some outdoor activities like a public arts gallery or performancing, like because Western community, so everywhere is the public art. So even for some underpass, it also have the paintings from the elementary school. So the roofscape can have the same function as that.
Yeah. I guess I remain unconvinced. I'm sorry. I'd like to see, you know, if it's necessary, more development of the idea. But I look at the site plan, you know, without it, and there's a lot of open space. You know, this is elementary through 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
How many students?
About 560.
560?
Yeah.
Oh. For the whole school?
Yeah.
How many students are in each classroom?
28. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
But the neurodiverse wing is 50 children?
For neurodiverse wing is about 40 autistic students,
Yeah.
and for each room is about 6 to 7 students.
Each classroom is 6
Yeah.
to 7 students.
Thank you. Wenji, you've brought a very provocative project to the school, and thank you for that. I'm wondering, Wenji and Alvaro did this award-winning competition in 601 that habited roofscape, and I'm wondering if your 600 project also had a habited roofscape, but it's nice to see you continuing that exploration. Just a few comments. You know, when I first was looking, the plan is very beautiful, I think. And I was thinking, oh, there's 2 courtyards, but there's really 3 courtyards, the way it kind of turns in with that one that's really between the larger and the smaller one. So just some comments I would have are to what is the relationship, this idea of front and back between the classrooms and the courtyards? and it ties into the single loaded versus double loaded question. And then I completely agree with the comment about the roof or the ceiling. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the section and developing kind of the tectonic expression. If you look up in the space we're in, I think ceilings and roofscapes are under utilized places to express architecture, and I think you can use that, what's happening in section and in the perspectives, an expression of the structure and the bearing and the relationship to those courtyards. And then finally, just on, and also thickness, how thick those things are, right? If you're going to put a tree in that courtyard and you're going to span quite a bit of space, you're going to need some depth there. And then, so the plan, the lower level ground plan, I would encourage you to do what you did with your section, and the whole left part of that plan should be poché, not just the part that's under the circle, so that you really read how the hill in the site is sloping off to the right. So all of that should be in poché.
I was just going to add one more thing. I think we were all working towards it. You've heard it about the structure and like all of that. This is a building that doesn't offer elevations very easily because of its geometry. And because of that, I feel like we have sort of under scrutinized the architectural expression. I see little glimpses of windows and maybe curtain walls and some fins there for perhaps shading, and there was some external structure that starts to show up, a few different ideas about materiality. I feel like that part of the project kind of took the back seat a little bit. Maybe you were too caught up in really developing the program and the interior of the spaces. It's clear where your emphasis came, but I think it's important as this project, because it is a capstone one, finds its way into your portfolio, that you take that at least initial idea of the structure of the actual architecture of the building to some level of development. I think right now there's ideas. I can tell you were thinking about it, it's just not developed, illustrated, and communicated. But I think it's a necessary piece to add to what is otherwise a very articulate project. But by allowing that to kind of drop between the cracks, it kind of becomes a weak spot. And not because it's wrong, it's because it's just not developed enough. So I think there's a little bit more work to be done to really start to make this feel more believable. And I think along the way, you will find the solution for the ceiling comment, for the roofscape comment. It's just that whole plane of the building that influences the architecture that just needs that next.
Thank you.
Hi, Wenji. Thank you for taking on this topic. Amy asked, I think, some really good questions I'd actually love to hear your response to. I think particularly the question of what, of the design principles and tactics and strategies that you developed for the neurodiverse education could and should be applied to general education spaces, design of those spaces.
Sorry, can you repeat it?
What tactics and principles that you used for the neurodiverse wing might be applied to the general education wing? And I think Rob brought up those comments as well.
Yeah, for the principles.
No, you may have done it. Is there something you want to show that you did? So the question is, maybe we'll at that, thinking about how you develop some lovely ideas to help with wayfinding and settling people in the neurodiverse part of the school, how those might have been applied into the general education area.
Yes, so for the general education wing, it has a lot of open space for the group learning. So this space can be future developed into the more transition space and then the escape space for the neurodiverse students. And also for wayfinding, the embedded escape space also can be applied into the interior wall in the corridor.
Yeah, a big part of designing any building, any project is studying and learning about the users, right? And I think you do a good job talking about the design principles for neurodiverse students in macro scale. But I personally have so many questions when it comes to the micro scale, because when you are dealing with different groups of users, especially neurodiverse children, you need to see how every single part of your design is resulting in changing people's behavior, right? And I mean, is being in a long corridor gonna cause some agitation? Being in that kind of little courtyard and seeing so many windows. So there are just, your project is a very good example of something that is really tied to environmental psychology. And I think you should not finish here, even though we keep saying this to all students, but I think you need to just, I mean, move it further based on these comments. And I think the first thing to do is to see what kind of user you are designing for, and then how these spaces are going to result in, I mean, are going to change their behavior. You know, are they addressing their needs? That part is really important.
Thank you. Thank you to the jurists for all your comments. I actually would say that Wenji did think a lot about the users and did a lot of research and speaking with parents. And you didn't say it, Wenji, but did visit schools. And looking at precedents of schools where architects had learned from research on what are the best practices for both the children and for the teachers. You obviously could have done different things. I do think that the jury did point out some places. We've talked about those ceilings. Brittany and I looked in some areas in the front where you can continue the work, but I'd like to celebrate the work that you did. One of the things that my aunt actually happens to did live, she passed away this year, in the townhouse right behind it. And so I grew up going to Reston. And Reston, one of the most amazing things when it was planned was that it was only built on 20% of the land, and 80% of the land is common. And they created walking paths so that people could walk to school and people could walk away, not intersecting with the vehicles. And what that did actually had a political effect on women. It meant that children could walk to school and women were free, and they became actually really politically active. And if you look at who moved into government in that county, more women than anywhere else because of that decision. And that Reston also was the first place where there were townhouses built in Virginia and the first integrated community as well. And so thinking about that context, and Wenji originally started just to design a school for neurodiverse children. And as she grew to pick this site and thought about it, she realized the challenge was actually think about maybe how to create a community that was welcoming to all, and was still navigating, thinking about where is it unique for the neurodiverse students and where is it maybe more conventional in the other one. And maybe that bifurcation, what we're hearing, needed to be reconsidered and bringing in some of the lessons from the work you learned from the neurodiverse children. I think the other thing is, it wasn't touched upon, but the idea that the roof is an incredible opportunity, a counter to Lake Anne, an arrival that could be a public space for the community outside, and how you might develop that further. Wenji, your drawings are beautiful. There's a quality to them that's light and lovely and enticing. And it's been really a pleasure to work with you through this project to get to this point, and I really look forward to seeing how your care and your love and your curiosity and your talents move you forward into the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
The stage crew is going to do a quick switch here, and we'll start shortly with the next project. Here, yeah. Should I tell him the tradition is the chair seats at least the second row?
Yeah.
All right, we're going to get started. We are continuing in the world of education. Next thesis candidate is Evan Lerner. He's a dual degree candidate in architecture and real estate development. His committee is chaired by Michael Kleiss. Also on the committee are Peter Noonan and Tanya Bonsall. Evan, whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Evan Lerner. Before I begin, I want to just say thank you to my committee, chaired by Professor Kleiss, as well as Professor Noonan and Tanya, who is also on my capstone committee. Any other faculty who I bugged and took the time out of their day to help me out through this process was greatly appreciated. And most importantly, my family and friends for all their support and everything they've done for me along the way. So today it's my pleasure to present to you my thesis project, which is Overcrowding to Opportunity. So there are a few background goals in the presentation today. I hope that by the end of the presentation, you have a holistic understanding of the problem that I'm trying to solve and the solution that hopefully appropriately addresses the issues that I have identified. So just going over some background, the issue at the root of what my thesis is trying to address is overcrowding in schools. Left unmitigated, overcrowding can lead to higher rates of absenteeism, burnout, and stress amongst both students and teachers. Overcrowding is systematic and widespread, affecting over 18,000 schools and 11 million school children across the country. Maryland is no stranger to overcrowding, as you can see here in the article from the Washington Post. But unfortunately, overcrowding is an extremely complex issue to solve. It's got many stakeholders, and the situations vary with every school and every district. And it's beyond the scope of just me or architecture really to solve on its own. So there is a common consequence of overcrowding that we as architects can attack on our own, which leads me to the portable classroom. I'm sure many of you have seen a portable classroom before. It looks just like that. Portables are used to mitigate overcrowding, meet class size restrictions, and move students during a renovation. They are often touted as being cheap, quick, and temporary. Portables are extremely common. The Modular Buildings Institute estimates that there are over 200,000 portable classrooms used by just public schools nationwide. There are 100,000 public schools nationwide, so that averages out to 2 per school, but only 31% of schools nationwide use a portable classroom. In Maryland, there are about 3,000 portable classrooms, many of which are in Prince George's County and Montgomery County, so right here. Portables have been used for decades. You can see a portable classroom right here used in the 1960s and one here that I took a photo of just a few months ago. The only difference being that the ones today have fewer windows than they did in the past. Niels Gore at the University of Kansas School of Architecture aptly describes portables as suboptimal. They've not been designed for maximum educational effectiveness. Instead, they've been optimized for transportability, minimum cost, and rapid deployment. I just want to touch on the minimum cost real quick because I was a little bit shocked with this number when I found it. So I talked a lot with representatives in Montgomery County and looked over their capital improvements plans, and they budget about $650,000 per portable classroom for that. So significant amount of money. Portables are often seen as temporary solutions, but fortunately, it's pretty well documented by many studies that once they're put on a site, they stand there and sit there permanently. Here in this image, you can see Roosevelt High School, which is right up the road in Greenbelt. They've used the same portable classrooms for at least 33 years. And I say at least because that's the oldest imagery I could find, so they could be there even longer. So that's at least 2 generations, if not more, of students using those same portable classrooms. And unfortunately, we can't rely on new schools to be built to fix issues of overcrowding and remove portable classrooms. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that there's an $85 billion funding gap between getting our schools in their current condition to where they need to be. So portables are here to stay. So portables are extremely common, but what is necessarily wrong with them? Well, first is the visual aesthetic, not great. Portables outside of school are an immediate visual indicator that a school suffers from overcrowding. Parents view portables classrooms as inferior to the main school building, and thus assume that the instruction in them will be inferior as well, according to researchers at Kennesaw State University. The poor visual aesthetic of many portables begs the questions, do school facilities impact student performance? And unsurprisingly, the answer is yes. 4 ambient environmental qualities in particular are critical for maintaining a productive and healthy learning environment. So the indoor air quality, the climate, the temperature, humidity, acoustics, and lighting. And unfortunately, portables often do not meet these standards. Compared to typical classrooms, portable classrooms have higher levels of volatile organic compounds, interior mold, noise intrusion, and lower levels of lighting. So an interesting statistic that I found in the same study from the California Department of Health Services is that during class time, 60% of teachers will turn off these wall-mounted HVAC units so that students can hear them teaching. So a major issue, because when you turn off the HVAC system, the indoor air quality deteriorates fairly rapidly. The study on the right is from a study of portable classrooms in Florida, which showed that between the hours of 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., so prime school hours, the levels of CO2 in portable classrooms exceeded the healthy threshold of 1,000 ppm and peaked at 1,500 ppm, so 150% of where those levels should be for 4 hours. So really not great. It shouldn't be a give and take between being able to hear your teacher and have a comfortable environment in the classroom. A few final facts that I found about portables that I wanted to mention is that students in portables have more negative attitudes towards school than students in the main buildings. Intense over-reliance on portable classrooms has significant effects on student achievement in reading and math. And most alarmingly was a study done by the University of Houston, which found that in a secondary school with 1,000 students, if portables use 5% of its building space, then they can expect 9 to 10 more dropouts per year. To get a better idea of how portables are made, I took a tour of a facility up in Leola, Pennsylvania. Thanks to John Costas at Modular Genius for organizing this, but it was a cool trip to see how they're made, and see the assembly lines and everything in the process. But from all these studies and from the site visits and interviews that I distilled 3 things that need to be addressed in portable classrooms. First is adaptability. As schools change, portables should have the ability to change as well. Second is flexibility. By this, I mean programmatic flexibility. One of the most common complaints that I got from interviewing school officials and people that go to school is that they really need more space for programs that can't occur in existing portable classrooms. Right now, portable classrooms just accommodate lecture style learning. So basically history, social studies, math, but there's a lot of other subjects, of course. And while portables reduce overcrowding in typical classrooms, they do not help in common areas such as libraries, gyms, et cetera, that are still subject to the same number of students, no matter if you have portables or not. And finally, portables need to be more reliable. In this sense, I mean that they need to be more consistently supportive and effective learning environments for their students, and as well as operationally reliable and sustainable. So all this leads to the thesis question, which is how might portable classrooms be reinvented to be more adaptable, flexible, and reliable learning environments? So there is an opportunity here for architects to have pretty meaningful change to go from whatever, or portable classrooms to something much better. One of the only things about portable classrooms that I didn't want to build off of is their prefabricated nature. Prefabrication has many advantages, the greatest of which is predictability, according to Anderson Architects. There are also efficiencies to be found in construction in the timeline and reduced carbon production and waste. A precedent that I was really drawn to is the zip-up house here by Richard Rogers. So it was never built, but Rogers took an early look at how we might use a kit of parts to create flexible spaces, both in the indoor and the outdoor. I also began to think about materiality. I was drawn to CLT for its structural stability, the sequestration of carbon, and its biophilic factors. And I was also very interested in pairing it with steel due to its very interesting tectonic contrast. Steel also provides a greater strength to weight ratio and allows for things such as cellular beams here. So you can route conduit or duct work through it, providing lots of high levels of flexibility and adaptability inside the building. Also, the opportunity to bring more natural light into classrooms. Studies such as this one from the Shang Mahone group found that more natural light increases student performance, especially academically, when it comes to math and reading. And I also looked at different alternative ways of how some other people have treated classrooms. So here, this project in Tokyo looks at creating basically a round circle of classrooms with a gathering space in the middle. So there's a central space where people can come and gather, bump into each other. And then there is significant natural light coming in through these panels that are very flexible and movable. So they can open them up to be single classrooms open to the outdoors, or even just little small pocket courtyards like where that tree is. Another strategy for organizing classrooms and creating a link to nature is this school by Arne Jacobsen in Denmark. Instead of having one big open space, each classroom has little pockets that they can access, but there's still significant amounts of natural light coming into the classroom and strong connections outside to natural elements such as the trees. And finally, I also looked at existing portable classrooms. So this is a very typical portable classroom like I've been showing in all the images. They have 741 square feet, which is a decent number for a classroom when it's 24 people, which is what they advertise. But in Montgomery County, it's at least 30 people or more in a classroom. So that square footage per person goes down quite rapidly. And I looked at Anderson Architects did a really interesting portable classroom, but only one out in Hawaii. And they kind of provided space on the upper limit or past the upper limit of what the Department of Education has for their guidelines, but I definitely wanted to fall within this range when it came to designing the kit of parts. So previously I've been referring to portable classrooms as portable classrooms. It was seen as a good idea to kind of take a break take a break from the portable classroom and rebrand to what my design should be, so as not to, confuse them. So from here on out, I'm going to do my best to refer to my design as the Adaptive Modular Classroom, or AMC. The AMC is made up at its core of these components here, the base modules, which measure about 9 by 28 feet. They can be combined pretty much endlessly in a row to create classrooms. So 4 of them is the typical AMC module size, which then creates a classroom of 990 square feet. And you can also have these other modules that would serve as support spaces for the classrooms. A key constraint for designing the size of the module was making sure it could fit on a standard truck so that people could get it anywhere they needed to. One of the big things that I learned when I was at the factory up in Pennsylvania is that it's obviously expensive, but especially in the older states in the Northeast, there are a lot of restrictions with bridges, which are extremely low, sometimes even only like 12 feet off the ground. So diving into the kit of parts, which I do have a model over there, so you can feel free to play with that if you want and assemble. So the kit of parts consists of floor panels, basically an end panel and the middle panels, as well as the steel structure, which holds up everything else. Again, focusing on sustainability and the tectonics, how everything comes together. I was really focused on the details and making sure that there was a continuous insulation envelope all the way around. So floor panels have a pretty high R value of R31. There are roof panels. So there's the flat panel, which is the standard, and also different skylights to enable natural light to come into the spaces in the classrooms. They are also pretty well insulated. Then there are wall panels. So these wall panels are what I came up with. They really could be anything. These will all be prefabricated elements. So instead of having like a full height window, you can have circular windows, which you could modify based on the program of the school. So it could be circles, like I mentioned, for smaller kids. But there are the wall panels, and then in between the wall panels would be these structurally insulated panels to kind of close everything up. That's just a detail of the wall panels. And then accessories to kind of make sure that the space is complete once people install it. So how does the system come together? First, you put in the beams to level everything and make sure that everything will come together well. Then you install the floor panels, which again are about 9 feet wide and 28 feet long. Then the steel goes up. The steel provides extra height, so these classrooms are much taller than typical portable classrooms, which the ceiling height is like as low as like 8'6", so quite low. The steel is assembled in multiple parts because it's too tall to fit on a standard truck. Then the roof panels are installed. Then the wall panels are installed next. The wall panels are the thing that need to be the most flexible in case they want to change from a solid panel to a window or add a door. The wall panels are hung on top of the, I'll come over here so you can see it. The wall panels are hung on top of the roof panels here and then are bolted down into the roof and then also into the steel, which is on the inside. To close the gaps, the SIPs are then installed, and then they would be waterproofed. And then to make everything look cohesive, a rain screen is installed next. And then finally, there are the accessories, which creates one unit of an AMC. Like I mentioned before, they can be combined to create endless lengths. So this is a double unit AMC with kind of a central, there's one unit in the middle, which acts as a support space. So there's 2 classrooms. Just going over some of the systems real quick, there's a raised floor, which allows for flexibility for conduit in the floor. I'm imagining it would be pressurized. That's where the distribution of air would come through as well. The windows can open up for airflow to come in. There would be solar panels on all the roofs to make sure that this project would be net zero. And plenty of natural light comes into the spaces as well. So as I like to say, this project is a little bit site agnostic, as in it should be able to go anywhere, but of course I did want to choose a site where to deploy it. So I did choose Montgomery County for several reasons, but Montgomery County, if anybody doesn't know, is right north of Washington, D.C. It's just like a mile that way. Montgomery County uses 429 portable classrooms, so a lot of portable classrooms spread all throughout the county. And many of the schools that don't use portable classrooms are also over 100% capacity. Another reason I chose Montgomery County is because their infrastructure is a little bit in a dire situation. Given their current age, MCPS should be renovating, renewing, or replacing 6 to 7 elementary schools and 2 or more secondary schools, so 8 or more schools every year for the next 20 years. So that's 160 schools. In the next 6 years, they're building 5, right? So if they're not building new schools, they'll be renovating them. And if they're renovating schools, those students have to go somewhere, which is almost certainly going to be a portable classroom. Specifically, I chose Montgomery Blair to deploy, or Montgomery Blair High School to deploy all of the AMCs. Montgomery Blair is really interesting. It was built in 1998, so it's not that old. It's the largest high school in Maryland with 3,200 students. There are 2 magnet programs, one being science, one being art, pulling people from all across the county. It is really over capacity. Its facilities conditions index score is 55%, so it's not in great shape. Really importantly, Montgomery County has a program called the Community Use of Public Facilities, which means that anybody in the county can rent out the spaces in these schools, not during school hours, of course, but that'll be important later on. I also chose Blair because it has a bunch of portable classrooms, but it's 2 distinct campuses of portable classrooms, which would allow me one site where I could do 2 different arrangements of this kit of parts. So looking at the site plan, which is right here, I'm calling them the East and West Village. So there's a little East Village here and the West over there. Jumping in first, so this is more of the academic side. In the East Village, there are active learning classrooms organized around a central forum here. Pretty orthogonal and not a crazy setup, but pretty normal, which they could do, and have a gathering space here in the middle. This image tries to activate the space a little bit and look at how it looks 3-dimensionally. You can kind of see how the portable class or the AMCs start to make that central gathering space on the east side of the campus. And the section is kind of to show how the classroom spaces spill out down into the forum area. And that's a quick view of how that is coming together. On the, inside on this row is lab spaces, because that was a big complaint. They don't have lab spaces. So this is just an image of how one of those spaces could look for science classes. So the West Campus is a bit more unique. It has this triangular shape. It's not a perfect like 30, 60, 90 rectangle, which I was hoping it would be. So the classrooms are arranged to make use of the triangular parking lot. I use the deck pieces to kind of create a central gathering deck in the middle there. You'll notice there are some holes in the decks, and that was there were several reasons behind that. First is the openings allow for plants to go in the middle. And second, where I had the prefabricated rectangular elements, but where they come together in this triangular shape, they would need custom pieces to be made. So by leaving some openings, I reduced the number of custom pieces that would have to be made, hopefully reducing cost if this was to be deployed. There's lots of active learning classrooms, but importantly, there is library space here, a gym space, and a maker space. So some additional spaces that kind of supplement the typical activities going on. And like I mentioned, after school hours, these spaces are basically not used. So with the community use of public facilities program, the public could come in, use the gym, use the library space, use the makerspace on the weekends and on the weeknights. Here's how that space is coming together. You got a section here through the library, makerspace, and then the gym on the right. And here you can kind of see how the decks have the holes in them for the trees. So this is how that deck space is coming together. An typical active learning classroom, gym space. And with that, I'm going to start wrapping up. So over the course of the presentation, I hope that you kind of understand the issue that I'm trying to solve, where all of the kit of parts kind of developed from, and how they are used on the site. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Cool.
That's right.
Well, thank you for taking on the super sexy part of portables, or learning cottages that I think MCPS has been calling it more recently, learning cottages. And yeah, I love the idea of using SIPs and, you know, just super insulating your envelope. It looks like you're doing a lot of passive house strategies, obviously the modularity of the solar monitors and, you know, PV on the roof, all of that is very, it just makes total sense. I was wondering, and this sort of echoes of what we were talking about in the last two reviews of like, did you have a chance to talk to either Montgomery County or Prince George's about why they aren't doing better insulated, more energy efficient learning cottages or modulars, and why are they reverting to just using the ones that they have?
Yeah, so I did talk with some people in both Montgomery County Public Schools and Prince George's County Public Schools in their facilities. I mean, fundamentally, I think it just comes down to an issue of cost.
Yeah.
Like, that's the answer. But it's also a little bit like what's available on the market. Like I mentioned, when I went up to the facility in Leola and saw what they're putting together, it is prefabrication and it's efficient, but it was somewhat outdated in their construction. And so they're not using the most efficient materials and they're still doing everything by hand. I think there's a lot of efficiencies that are made with like CNCing and computerization that could make things like these more sustainable, but they're just not available in the market. So it's both an issue of cost and lack of options.
Gotcha. Because I do know that for Montgomery County, especially in Prince George's, I think to a lesser effect, when they look at, you know, say the energy efficiency or the numbers of their actual building, like Blair or Roosevelt or any of the other projects, they track the numbers of how the building's performing, like the EY or the energy usage index, with and without the learning cottages or portables, because the portables track it up so high, like it just blows out their numbers, and they know they're very inefficient. And so, but they're very transparent about how their buildings perform energy wise. And, you know, I know that you talked about, you know, a couple of statements of like solar panels to make it net zero. And, you know, one question is, I know you're not really showing, you talked a little bit about the flooring, you know, but you're not showing the ductwork and some of the systems. So one question is, did you look at run any numbers on things like natural daylighting or energy efficiency of these units to see sort of what is that formula for your standard module? So that's one question. Like, how does it actually perform? Since you're talking about such a small building block scale. And another question might be tied to, now that you've created this kit of parts and these modular classrooms, and you've shown how they can be organized and create outdoor space and or be combined to be other types of learning environments, are you going to give yourself the opportunity to like break your rules and create more customization? Maybe there's a unique way of learning or use or functionality that is also missing by just replacing what they have with what you're giving them, and can your pieces conform to that or break the rules?
Sure.
And so those are just a couple thoughts.
Sure. So appreciate the questions. So for your first question, I think if I had more time, I would have loved, like one of the things I really wanted to do was do glare analysis just to see. So originally I had skylights on every roof and then got some feedback and they're like too many skylights. So I'd love to see how it actually performs. In terms of being energy efficient, so the systems, I tried to show them up here, but basically I tried to keep systems to a minimum and put them all on the floor. So air distribution happens in the floor. So there is return ductwork up there. It's kind of hidden in the cellular beam, and there's sprinklers up there, but they're fairly small. I think it would not be super difficult to make them actually net zero. I know in Australia they put solar panels on top of all of their portable classrooms, and because portables are only used for a few hours a day, they don't require energy at night, so it's a little bit easier to make them net zero and their smaller scale as opposed to traditional buildings.
Just on that, but since you were talking about CUPF and
Yeah.
the fact that you can rent these spaces after hours, and you're showing spaces like this could be a gym, it could be a lab or maker space, you are giving the school system the opportunity to say that after hours use doesn't just happen within the existing building. It could also happen in these better spaces that you're providing. Like you're making what is a detriment now like a new amenity, like a new village of learning that is better and maybe more desirable day and night. And so I would argue that maybe, looking at your fenestration, thinking about doing the numbers on like net zero or what it would actually, what is the cost per square foot, like getting that next level of analysis would make this even like sing better.
For sure.
So yeah.
I think,
sorry.
And then to respond to your second question really quick about, breaking the rules, that was something I thought about all semester and talked about a lot with my committee, because I think it's a slippery slope to break the rules, because I did want to show off the kit of parts in a little bit in a restrained way, because if I start breaking the rule there, then I can do it, there, and there, and then it becomes not really a systematic kit of parts. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the tectonic argument is well developed and basically reflected in the design response. In your presentation, you were talking about how the school environment, the classroom environment impacts learning. You mentioned a little bit about daylighting. But what other aspects you've considered in your prototype, if I can see that as a prototype, you considered that impact student learning?
Sure. So the first one I would say is acoustics. Interior reverberation is something that I would have liked to have gotten to more, but reducing noise coming from the outside in was important. So the insulation helps with that. Changing the mechanical system from wall mounted to the downblast under air helps. Other things with ceiling height. Did mention, or I read several studies that said higher ceiling height, but within a good proportion is better. So making the spaces feel higher. So that's why at the beginning I looked at doing just a unitized like volumetric thing, but it couldn't fit on a truck to get the ceiling height that I wanted. So that's why the ceiling heights are a bit higher. Also the windows, having windows out helps students with a feeling of security. Also, there's the biophilic aspect. So that's again using the CLT used to the outside. There was a lot of studies I did earlier on with environmental psychology to try to make the classrooms as comfortable as possible. But some of them didn't end up making it all the way through.
Yeah, your focus was really on the structural, constructional aspects of the project. What makes these gathering spaces, like in this courtyard and that one? So do you think they offer opportunities? Because also one of the issues or challenges of these, if we say temporary environments, is that they don't offer equity principles, because other children or other students have better experiences.
Right.
So how can you compensate that?
Right. So there was thinking throughout like the course of this thesis, like why not, like we shouldn't be making these spaces as nice as the main building. They should be even nicer if possible. So to get to the gathering spaces question, I think there was a few things we did with circulation. So especially here where people come out and like the idea of propinquity and just bumping into people and maybe providing furniture like here. So you bump into someone or you go and sit down, there's shading. I think providing the spaces is the first step. If I go back to one of the images I have, you can see that portables right now, they don't consider the exterior space at all. So I think a big first step was just even having the ability, sorry, it's like one of the first slides. So here, you can see like, that's the outdoor space between portables. So it's pretty, like I wouldn't want to be back there even during the day. So just providing spaces where students can go and ensuring that when people are moving throughout the space, it's not as structured maybe as like in that aisle there.
Okay. Now, how can you sell your idea to a school district? What makes a school district interested in your design solution?
Good question. So there's a lot of aspects to that. I think just at a high level, it would be the posing better spaces. There is a way I found to do it somewhat affordably as well. I could talk about that for a long time. It's also somewhat represented here, where they're deployed all across Montgomery County. And if you do that, unlock federal and state grants, which make them essentially much more affordable. What I did in my capstone was I took these portable classrooms, deployed them at every school in Montgomery County, did a lot of cost analyses with data from general contractors, talked to a lot of people, and came out about one of these AMCs costs about $400,000 as opposed to the $650,000 compared to what they have now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. You're an excellent communicator. And you did a really good job of folding a lot of the information that you researched and learned into actual analysis, which to me, the analysis happens in asking the question, so what? So you extracted from the things you learned the problems specifically to address and, zeroed in on very particular elements that then you drove into your design. So kudos for that. I think there's really, really great continuity into this. I love your project because it reminds me of a similar passion project we did 15 years ago with Montgomery County, trying to figure out their portable classroom problem. And what was interesting, though, is that we were collaborating at the time with Williams-Scotsman, which is one of the biggest manufacturers of prefabricated classrooms and all kinds of prefabricated buildings. So they were very passionate about improving the current models. When I say they, not just the schools, but the manufacturers themselves. And it's been an issue for designers for a while because they're so ubiquitous and everything you've shown us, even that image alone could drive anybody crazy.
Right.
So I really commend you in taking on the subject and really continuing the conversation forward. I think you have a very solid start with this to where you can continue the conversations with Montgomery County, knowing that they've been working on trying to figure out how to upgrade for many years. But I feel like kind of rekindling conversations with the manufacturers is also extremely important. And to that end, I think there's like a little bit of a differentiation between, for example, how Williams-Scotsman would do it, which is really building that module, right? Anything that can move on a truck with this proportion, and build it to its fullest extent so that it can be then assembled on site, as opposed to the system that you're proposing, which is a lot more flat pack. Like everything comes stacked on the truck and then it gets. So those are two different systems. And I think that I agree with you that the flat pack, for all intents and purposes, has more legs because it does have more flexibility. And when you start talking to the manufacturers, the biggest issues they face is really tooling all of the factories, locally to be able to produce these components, and then ultimately scaling things.
Right.
And so when it comes to something as generic as a SIP panel or things like that, that certainly gives you a whole lot of flexibility. So I love that direction too. The fact that you didn't go into what is truly a portable, modular kind of classroom, but you're actually looking at modular construction that gets you to where you need to be. I think that's really important. I think some of the walls we hit back when we were studying this was the fact that they were still looking to transport a volume of this and then assemble it and things like that. And it turns out to be more expensive than anyone thinks. There's like some efficiency in assembling it in the factory, but then once it comes on site and actually making it in a functional, watertight, air-conditioned space is where a lot of the added cost comes. So I think all of that is really a great direction. I love the fact I was kind of peeking into your board there, that you toyed around a little bit with the idea of how that gets funded. I love the idea of creating a revenue stream for the school that can help them fund that. I see that that's what you're thinking about. So a lot of really great stuff. I love this cross-disciplinary business architecture thing. The architecture can use a lot more of that, and it's going to help us win the design battles actually with a much clearer understanding of cost and how things actually work. So I think that makes your proposal stronger. Graphics are very clear, especially kind of the more diagrammatic 3D studies. You've gone quite a bit the distance of assembling these pieces and detailing them. The one thing that I want to be a little bit critical of is the end result. And I think it's a lovely approach to how you assemble them on the site, one and a little bit more of a plaza, landscape sort of area. Another one, a little bit, like you said, more typical with just central commons and things like that. When I look at those, though, in plan or even in some of the renders, it still screams modular classroom. I think that's the only thing that I think you can probably push a little bit more on, in the sense that, and I think that's a little bit of the comment of how do you customize or make things a little bit different. And I totally agree with the fact that you don't want to change the kit parts too much, but I don't think you're fully exploring of what you can do even with the kit parts that you've created. So for example, one thing is like all of your sticks are that 24-foot wide. You don't have to limit yourself to that. Like you can have sticks of 24-foot wide for the classrooms, but then when you come to the gym and some of the other stuff, they can actually line on the long side and you can start to create different geometries. And that starts to kind of break away a little bit from that linear proportional thing that is so stigmatized and perhaps doesn't even create the best space. It may be a good space for a classroom, but maybe it's not ideal for the workshop and for the gym, but it just gives you more variety, even within the kit parts you created. I'm also wondering if it, right now they're sort of episodic and they're sort of piece by piece. Can they start to create, that starts to feel a little bit more like kind of that donut quarter thing. But maybe the spaces and the distances between the different pieces still makes it feel very much kind of episodic. So I feel like you've worked up a pretty good system all up to that point. I think this could use a little bit more of a, you've changed the name, you've rebranded it, you're trying to like switch the way in which people are looking at it. Let that kind of spatial and architectural arrangement like really go there. To that end, I'd be careful with some of the punched openings, the generic windows that kind of start to harp back there. I know cost is an issue, so you have to solve how to do it economically, but liberate this kind of space from all of its preconceptions using readily available kind of more generic components. And I think you're already on the right path with that. The only last thing I would mention is I kept debating in my mind the structure that you've introduced. And I see what you're saying. It's trying to build flexibility with the circular openings. That's the one thing where it's going to be really hard to bring that into that flat pack because it's such a custom piece, and you're going to have to tool factories to make you enough of these in this particular configuration so that it works for that. But for a thesis project, I think it's great. It's compelling. It gives it a look. It gives it identity. I'm cool with it. But I think like thinking about this for real, and this is a very real problem and a very real proposal. I think that you can solve this without having to lean onto these highly customized structural components.
Sure.
And there's like a plenty of readily available prefab, similar like the SIPs, structural components that you can bring here and then really hone in on then the quality and the architectural space and the light and the materials and all of that. I'm sorry, I said last thing, but there's one more last thing is the HVAC. It's so important. And you already mentioned this is where a lot of these fail. And it's not really as simple as like, okay, what kind of volume are you creating? Let's size the unit according to that. You started to think a lot more kind of holistically about it. One thing I take exception, and I think it came into some of our research and conversation with the manufacturers, is like bringing the air from above, especially if you're creating volume into the space. Everyone will tell you like try to cool and heat the spaces that are being occupied. So it came up in some studies that, especially since you're already creating a double floor there and a raised floor, that you can actually start to introduce the heating and the cooling in the floor system so that you're, is that what you have
Yeah, yeah.
here? Okay, I missed that part. And
Yeah,
so
it's-
then
it's
you're
kind of hard
moving
to see
up.
here, but you can see like the air coming up through the.
I thought you said that you're introducing it from above, and
No,
that's
so-
where I got
Yeah,
confused.
so the air comes up through the floor.
Perfect,
And then
yeah.
there are return ducts in the ceiling.
Got it. Okay, somehow I heard and read it differently. That's excellent. That's actually a key part of the innovation. And also like we discussed at the time, like sort of the radiant floors, which again, if you scale it enough and if it's just a mat and now there's very inexpensive ways of doing it, it really elevates the overall, it's radiant heating and cooling, which is probably what you have there. And then you would need the secondary system with the ducts and things like that that help supplement things and whatnot. In general, it's exciting to see something so thorough, so considered, and so complete. I think the business part of it and really talking to all of these different elements really take your project to the next level. Really, truly a thesis project. So thank you for this. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You should go last. What she said. Architecture wise, convincing, economics wise, convincing, site plan wise, less convincing.
Sure.
I think. And, it strikes me that, if you're going to build a better mousetrap, you can build a cheaper mousetrap and it's the same mousetrap, or you can actually make a better mousetrap out of it. And for me, it's the relationship of these things to the mothership. They have no relationship whatsoever. And, why even be adjacent to the mothership? It could be on the other side of the street. What are these communities? This guy, there's a big walkway here, right? I mean, this is a major pedestrian thoroughfare, and it comes to, a corner of, where's it site plan? It looks at a corner and an overlook, right? This is a balcony overlook that looks down on that. I think you access this here and here, right?
Yeah. So
That
it should continue.
Okay, so I have to kind of dodge around a little bit.
Yeah.
But if it's raining or snowing or cold, I still have to, if I'm in the mothership and are these students, these students are in here, right? And then they come out to this as another classroom.
Right.
So I got to go out into the weather and then go into the classroom and then go back. And what door do I come out of? Over here.
There's a door here.
Okay.
Here. I mean, for this side, you come out of these two.
Okay.
And over here, it's quite a long walk. You do it from here all the way over.
Yeah.
Here.
And I have to cross a parking lot to get
Yeah.
there. This thing's on the other side of the parking lot. So, I mean, if I were going to make a better mousetrap and spend maybe the same amount of money, I don't know. I mean, I would add another piece that might be canopy, a canopy that hooks all these things together. And so I get an arcaded courtyard.
Yeah.
And it plugs into the main building somehow. And maybe it's outside, but at least you don't get rained on. And there's a way to gracefully get in, I mean, that's what's kind of missing here also. I mean, you make an inside, but there's no way to gracefully get in.
Mhm.
You know, there's no way to gracefully attach to the mothership,
Yep.
you know, and it's really the site plan that I would wish were, you know, more convincing, I guess.
Yeah.
Because the architecture is, you know,
Yep.
and that's been said. But you know, if I had to go out there, I'd say, ah, Christ, I got to go outside again and get in, you know,
Yeah.
and go to that, you know, I'm in, you know, you say I'm in East Jesus, you know, East Campus. I got to go to East Campus, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
and that's the part that's not convincing.
Sure. I think you bring up, some really great points. In terms of like, so I'll go to the shading thing first. That was definitely something that we talked about a lot and really probably should have made it onto the accessories here.
Yeah.
Because we talked about it a lot, like here, like you have the trees for shading, but if it became a unified structure, maybe linking a tensile structure as a canopy between everything, it could make it seem a lot more holistic. So yeah, it's something that I wish made it in there.
And beautified.
Yeah,
You
right.
know, I mean,
Absolutely.
a tensile structure linking all these things together
Mhm.
would really unify them and beautify them.
Mhm.
You
And
know,
then-
and it would make the students, you know, not feel like a second class citizen, you know,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
I'm in West Campus.
Yeah. And then just like really quick to respond to the location on the site. So I think there was a question about like, these could go anywhere. They could go here, they could go here. In the end, I made the decision to sacrifice the parking lots, which is where they go. Just because like one of the big complaints is when portables go in, like they do in that photo, and they take up the baseball fields, right? So in the hierarchy of exterior spaces, I figured parking lots were the first to get. Yeah. Sure.
So, Evan, it's been a pleasure to see this develop. You know, I think a lot of comments have been made on the kind of economic and technical propositions. I think on this question of how to make how to go beyond the stigma of the portable classroom compound and make these like the most desirable classrooms on campus. You know, I'd love to see, you know, I don't know if it's as much about form as maybe integration into site. So lean into the positive attributes of these, which one of which is direct access to the outdoors, and figure out what programmatically works with that. So your East Commons, you know, make that the sciences quad, right? Where, you know, integrate it with stormwater management or you know, move beyond net zero to off the grid. So now we're not having to tie into a grid and we're liberating it from, you know, the mothership and make this, you know, an immersive science experience for the students. Outdoor education or outdoor education opportunities or outdoor play. So early childhood campus where, you know, we have this amazing outdoor play experiences for the youth. So if they, you know, I acknowledge the challenge of having to go outside in the cold and the rain, but if they're going to have to do it, make it something they want to do. Like
Sure.
I'm looking forward to going to this.
Yeah.
So
Good point.
I hope you take this beyond what you're doing here and move past, bring this out and make it happen.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the great questions. I am Tanya Banso, one of his committee members from the real estate side. I just want to say, commend Evan for taking on this challenge. I remember when you came up to me last summer with this project, I was like, okay, how are you going to make it feasible from the real estate perspective, financially, market, entitlement, everything that kind of goes into it. And, you know, he challenged himself and, you know, challenged me as well and worked really hard last fall to kind of really dig into the nitty gritty of not just the design side of things, but also the real estate side of things to really make it work, and surprised me. He presented his capstone presentation on Friday, which was wonderful. And you all see a product of his capstone, real estate capstone there as well. So, you know, I would definitely agree with a lot of comments that you have received, and it's a great project and something unique, you know, from the real estate capstone perspective. As we all always go with traditional commercial, multifamily, retail, mixed use kind of projects. And you brought in a different perspective about like something like this can be done as well. So, and I do want to acknowledge Scott, our major, who was his capstone mentor, to help him with all the finding all that capital stack over there, which is very complex. If you're interested in learning, it's like looking at all the different types of financing tools to kind of bring in to actually really make it work. And so I would just say, challenge you to kind of look outside the Montgomery County and see how you can help other schools, counties, with something that you have proposed here. It's been amazing working with you, and
Likewise.
congratulations. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to just say one quick thought. Evan, I think one of the things that's also an opportunity is to consider where there can be adjustability for local talent and local conditions. So it's one of the things about the modular classrooms is they're like the same everywhere. So where, and just building on Dan's comment also, but where can there be? Is it in the facades, is it in the materials? Is there something that makes that there's a way to customize it or, and I think that would make it strong. And I'd also say that students at Montgomery Blair High School are not allowed outside for lunch. My son went there, right?
Yeah.
And so the notion that you actually could have classrooms where you go outside is one of the assets.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I maybe represented it a little bit too homogeneous, but the idea with the rain screen and the cladding is that, the rain screen can vary however you want to. One thing that I did try to focus on was like creating fronts and backs. So like here you can see it's solid facing the parking lot. And I think if this is a flat panel, it presents a really good opportunity for local talent to come, maybe do some placemaking, put in a mural, right, exactly. Right. Yep. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think like if this thesis was to continue going, just in the amount of time I had, I was like, I had to keep my scope small, but I was like, if expanding vertically definitely is something, because Montgomery Blair is blessed with a lot of space. Many other schools, especially in cities, New York City, Washington, DC, utilize a lot of portables, don't have that kind of space. So building up with the portable classrooms would be a major asset.
So great discussion. We need to bring it to a close shortly. I'm going to hand the mic to Professor Kleiss to offer a conclusion. But one thing I want to say, actually two quick things. What I liked working with Evan is, he rolls his sleeves up and he just gets the work done. He engaged with so many people outside the architecture profession, as Tanya mentioned, and looking at the work that's taking place up in the counties, up in the manufacturers. And the project the first few meetings, it was kind of focused on all of this stuff. And we said, hey, you don't need all those skylights, or sometimes you might rotate these things around. And so, and then you also looked at what Rob was talking about, kind of how do these things deploy on the site. So I think that was great. There are a lot of people looking at this from outside the school. During the presentation, I'm getting texts from Gensler and Structurecraft. So you need to take this out there, but beyond the school. And I think it definitely has legs. Good luck.
Thank you.
Well, I know I'm standing between you and lunch, so I'll be brief. A lot of architecture students are very ambitious when they start with a thesis, and they want to do the big project that they haven't had the chance to do. What struck me about Evan is like he looked at the small thing, and rather than thinking about no project is too big that our architect can do, he said there's so much what we can do with the things that we consider really small and almost tactical. Congratulations, Evan.
Thank you very much.
We're going to take an hour break for lunch. I invite our reviewers to come upstairs. We'll meet back here at 1 p.m.
Oh, yeah. Put it right
Great. And like, you know,